Welcome in, everyone, to another deep dive.
hmm
Today, we're going to be talking about something that's pretty important to all of us, climate change. But specifically, we're going to be looking at how humans think about climate change.
Yeah, that's right. I think, we hear climate change, we immediately think the science, right? But there's actually this whole fascinating area of research that looks at just how we wrap our heads around it.
Yeah, it's not just about like the data points and the graphs, right? It's
hmm
about like the psychology, the economics, even the philosophy of it all.
Yeah, exactly. And it's kind of a puzzle because, we've got this overwhelming scientific consensus, right? 97% of scientists agree on human-caused climate change, but public opinion is all over the map.
Yeah, that's what really caught my eye in this research paper we're looking at today, Deconstructing the Climate Conundrum. It's like you've got some folks in full-on panic mode, others are skeptical, and a lot are kind of somewhere in between.
Yeah, and the research really dives into, why that gap exists.
So what is it? What's going on there?
Well, I think a big part of it is just the nature of climate science itself. I mean, it's complex, right? You're dealing with probabilities and long-term trends and all these interconnected systems.
Yeah, it's not exactly dinner table conversation, is it?
No, it's not. And, when we try to simplify it for the public, you kind of lose that nuance. It's like trying to explain a symphony by only playing one note, you know?
You're right. You miss the bigger picture.
Exactly. And the paper actually gives a really interesting example of this. It talks about the term global warming.
Oh yeah, I mean that makes sense. It's technically accurate, but I guess it can be misleading too.
Yeah, exactly, because it leads people to think, okay, climate change just means hotter temperatures everywhere all the time, and it's so much more than that.
Right. It's not just like cranking up the thermostat globally. It's about these regional changes.
Yeah.
The extreme weather, the shifting rainfall patterns.
Yeah, right. And all those things are harder to sum up in a soundbite.
Totally. And I bet that contributes to the confusion.
hmm
If people are only getting these like oversimplified explanations, it's no wonder some are skeptical.
Exactly. It's hard to grasp the full scope of the issue when you're only seeing a tiny piece of the puzzle.
So we've got this complex science on one hand
hmm
and the need to communicate it clearly on the other. But this paper doesn't stop there. It dives into how our own brains can actually make this whole thing trickier.
Oh, yeah. Our brains are fascinating, aren't they? They're wired in some pretty interesting ways.
Yeah, there's this whole section on confirmation bias, which basically means we tend to favor information that already aligns with what we believe.
Right. So if someone's already convinced climate change is a hoax, they're going to be more likely to seek out information that supports that view, even if it's not accurate.
It's like cherry picking the data to fit your conclusion instead of letting the data lead you to the conclusion.
Exactly. And it happens on the other side, too, right? Someone who's really worried about climate change might only focus on the most alarming news stories.
So it's like we're all living in these echo chambers, just reinforcing what we already think.
It makes it really tough to have productive conversations and find common ground.
And then the paper brings up these two other brain quirks, optimism bias, and temporal discounting,
Oh, yeah, those are fun ones.
which I guess basically means we're not wired for long-term thinking.
Yeah, it's like we know we should be saving for retirement, but that new phone is calling our name.
Totally. We choose the donut over the salad, the instant gratification over the long-term benefit. And with climate change, the worst consequences seem so far off.
Right. It's hard to make a distant threat feel urgent.
So we've got complex science battling our own brain's quirks, but the paper makes it clear this isn't just a scientific problem. It brings in these cultural and ideological narratives, how we view progress, nature, social justice, even all feeds into how we think about climate change.
Absolutely. Our values are like lenses through which we view the world, and those lenses are going to shape how we see this issue.
Yeah, it makes sense. Someone who sees nature primarily as a resource to be exploited is probably going to have a different take on environmental regulations.
Exactly. And the paper specifically mentions this narrative of industrialization and progress.
Oh, yeah. How does that tie into how we think about climate change?
Well, for centuries, we've equated progress with, industrial growth, technological advancements.
Right. Bigger, faster, more.
Exactly. But that narrative often overlooks the environmental costs.
So even the idea of slowing down growth to curb emissions can feel like a threat to progress itself.
It goes against that deeply ingrained story we've been telling ourselves for generations.
And then there's the whole equity and justice angle. The paper points out that climate change doesn't impact everyone equally.
That's a really crucial point. Vulnerable communities, often those with fewer resources, are hit the hardest.
Yeah, for them, climate change isn't some abstract future threat. It's a daily reality.
Exactly. And And that lived experience is going to shape their understanding and their priorities in a very different way.
So we've gone from hard science to psychology to cultural values, and we can't ignore the big elephant in the room, economics.
You're right. Money Talks in the paper really digs into the tension between our current economic systems and the need for sustainability.
It asks this really fundamental question: can capitalism, a system based on endless growth, actually adapt to a finite planet?
Yeah, and that gets to the heart of a lot of the debates around climate action, right? How do we balance the need for economic growth with the need to protect the environment?
And, of course, the paper doesn't shy away from the role of powerful industries like the fossil fuel sector.
Right, they have a huge stake in maintaining the status quo, even if it's ultimately unsustainable.
So even if we've got the science on our side, we've also got these economic and political forces pushing in the opposite direction.
It's like a tug of war between the urgency of the climate crisis and the inertia of these powerful systems.
And speaking of politics, the paper then shifts gears to look at how political structures themselves shape our response to climate change.
Right, it talks about this tension between international agreements and national interests.
Yeah, why is global cooperation so hard, even when we're facing a global threat?
And because countries often prioritize their own economic and political agendas, even if it means undermining global efforts.
It's like everyone agrees we need to put out the fire, but no one wants to sacrifice their own bucket of water.
It's a tough situation, but the paper suggests that public discourse and democracy could be part of the solution.
So the idea is that through open and informed debate, we can arrive at policies that actually reflect the collective good.
Right, but in reality, things are a lot messier than that.
Oh yeah, with all the misinformation and political maneuvering out there, it could be really hard to even know what to believe, let alone how to act.
It's a challenge for sure, and we can't forget the role of the media in all of this.
Okay, so we've gone from the hard science to our brains, to cultural values, to economics, to politics, and now the media landscape. What a whirlwind.
And they all feed into each other. It's all connected.
So where does the media fit into this puzzle?
Well, the way information is presented shapes how we understand it, right? And with the internet and social media, we're bombarded with information from all sides.
Yeah, it's like drinking from a fire hose sometimes.
And that can lead to those echo chambers we talked about, where people only see information that confirms their existing beliefs.
So it's not just about getting the science right. It's about understanding how that science is filtered through all these other layers of human experience and perception.
Exactly, and that's why this paper is so valuable. It helps us see the bigger picture, the whole human story behind the climate crisis.
It's like we're starting to see the full complexity of the challenge, and that's the first step to finding more effective solutions.
Because if we ignore the human element, we're never going to get where we need to go. It's easy to get lost in all that, right? All those factors, all the complexity.
Yeah, it's a bit overwhelming, isn't it?
But you know what? I actually find it kind of empowering.
Empowering how?
Well, because once you acknowledge the whole scope of the challenge, right? Once you see all those pieces of the puzzle, you can start to come up with better strategies.
Right, I see what you mean. It's like if you're trying to fix a car, but you're only looking at the engine, you can miss a lot of other stuff.
Exactly. And by understanding those psychological and cultural and economic barriers, we can actually tailor our solutions to how humans actually work, you know?
So instead of just hitting people over the head with facts and figures, which clearly isn't working that well, we need to appeal to their emotions, their values, their...
Exactly. We need to make climate change feel personal, not just some distant threat.
Like, how do we actually do that?
Well, I think we need to move away from all the doom and gloom messaging, you know?
Yeah, all the world is ending stuff can be a bit paralyzing.
Exactly. It makes people feel helpless. So instead, let's focus on solutions, you know, on positive stories that empower people.
So less we're all going to die, and more, here's what we can do to create a better future.
Yeah, exactly. Highlight the agency people have, even in the face of this huge challenge.
Okay, I like that. And when we talk about solutions, we need to connect them to what people actually care about, right?
Absolutely. So instead of framing climate action as a sacrifice, let's highlight how it can lead to a healthier, more prosperous, more equitable world.
I love that it's not give up your car. It's, hey, imagine clean air, walkable cities, efficient public transportation.
Exactly. Things that people actually want, you know, a better quality of life. And that's where storytelling comes in.
Oh, I knew you were going to say that you love a good story.
I do. And for good reason. Stories are powerful. They help us connect with complex issues on an emotional level.
So instead of just showing graphs about rising sea levels, we can share stories about real people being impacted, you know?
Exactly. Human stories make it real, make it relatable, and when we talk about solutions, let's showcase the human ingenuity, the resilience, the collaboration.
Okay, so we're shifting from data to values and using stories to bring those values to life. What else can we do to move people from understanding to action?
Well, we also need to address those economic and political barriers we talked about earlier.
That's the tough part, isn't it?
It is, but we're starting to see some promising developments, like in the world of finance, for example.
Oh, yeah. What's happening there?
Well, there's a growing movement towards green finance and impact investing,
So investors are starting to realize that sustainability is actually good for business.
Exactly. It's not just about doing good anymore. It's about recognizing the long-term risks of ignoring climate change.
Right, because if the planet goes down, we all go down.
And as more investors prioritize sustainability, it creates incentives for businesses to follow suit.
So it's like a domino effect.
That's the hope. And then on the political side, we need to push for policies that support a just transition to a clean energy economy.
Investing in renewables, promoting energy efficiency, that kind of thing.
Exactly. And making sure that communities that rely on fossil fuels aren't left behind.
Right. We can't just abandon those folks. We need to create opportunities for them in this new economy.
And that's where political engagement becomes so important. Voting for leaders who prioritize climate action, holding them accountable for implementing those policies.
So individual actions matter, but ultimately we need systemic change.
Right. It's both. We need everyone working together, governments, businesses, individuals.
Okay, so we've talked about shifting the narrative, focusing on solutions and addressing the economic and political barriers. But there's one piece we haven't really talked about yet, technology.
Ah, yes, technology, the double-edged sword.
How so?
Well, on one hand, it's contributed to the problem, right? Think about all the technologies that rely on fossil fuels.
Transportation, energy production, all that.
Exactly. And then there's the whole issue of technology consumption itself, all the gadgets and devices we use.
Yeah, all that stuff has a huge environmental footprint.
So we need to address how technology is part of the problem, but at the same time, technology is also key to finding solutions.
Okay, so how can we leverage technology for good?
Well, just look at renewable energy. The advances in solar, wind, geothermal, they're making clean energy more and more cost competitive.
So we're getting better at harnessing power from nature, basically.
Exactly. And then there's carbon capture and storage.
Oh, yeah, I've heard about that. Basically sucking carbon out of the air, right?
That's the idea. It's still early stages, but it has huge potential. And then there's geoengineering.
Like, that sounds pretty sci-fi.
It is. It involves large-scale interventions in the Earth's system, like reflecting sunlight back into space or seeding clouds.
But that sounds risky, doesn't it? Like messing with the planet's systems?
It is. There are definitely risks and potential unintended consequences, so we need to proceed with caution.
It's not a quick fix, that's for sure.
No, it's not a silver bullet. We need to carefully consider the potential benefits and risks of any technological solution.
So technology is both part of the problem and part of the solution. It depends on how we use it.
Exactly. We need to be intentional about developing and deploying technology in a way that aligns with our sustainability goals.
Okay, so we've explored a lot here. The psychology, the economics, the politics, even the role of technology. It feels like we're starting to untangle this web of interconnected issues.
It's complex, but I'm actually feeling hopeful.
Really, after all that we've discussed?
I know it sounds strange, but here's the thing. I think we're starting to see a shift in consciousness. More and more people are waking up to the realities of climate change and the urgency of taking action.
And we're seeing solutions emerge from all directions, right?
Exactly. New technologies, sustainable business practices, grassroots movements, it's all happening.
So it's not a hopeless situation.
Not at all. It's going to take a collective effort, but I believe we have the ingenuity and the resilience and the compassion to overcome this challenge.
I'm starting to feel that glimmer of hope myself, but if we're going to turn that hope into action, we need to understand not just the what of climate change, but the why.
You're so right. Why should we care? Why should we make sacrifices? Why should we change?
These are the big questions, and that's what we're going to explore in the final part of our deep dive, the ethical and philosophical dimensions of climate change.
We're going to delve into the values that drive our actions and the moral imperative to protect this planet for present and future generations.
It's going to be a thought-provoking discussion for sure, so stay tuned. Okay, so we're back and ready to tackle the big why of climate change. We've talked about the science, the psychology, the economics, the politics, even technology, but now it's time to talk about values.
Yeah.
Like, what are the ethical principles behind all of this.
Yeah, it is fascinating, isn't it? We can have all the data in the world, but ultimately our actions come down to what we believe is right. What we value, what we think is worth protecting.
And this research paper really digs into that.
Yeah.
It talks about anthropocentrism, that human-centered worldview, but then it also brings up ecocentrism, which is a whole other way of looking at things.
Yeah, ecocentrism challenges that idea that humans are somehow separate from or superior to nature. It's more about recognizing that interconnectedness, that we're all part of this web of life.
Yeah, it's like that whole hierarchy we've created with humans at the top needs a rethink, doesn't it?
Yeah, and ecocentrism says, hey, maybe that's not ethically sound. If we're all connected, if ecosystems have intrinsic value, then we have a responsibility to protect them not just for our benefit, but for their own sake.
It's a big shift. And it makes me think about that idea of intergenerational ethics. Like climate change forces us to think about our responsibility to future generations.
It's a heavy one, isn't it? The choices we make today have consequences that will ripple far beyond our lifetimes. We're shaping the world that our children and grandchildren will inherit.
It's like we're borrowing the planet from them and we need to return it in decent shape.
Exactly. And that's the challenge, right? How do we balance the needs of the present with the needs of the future?
Yeah. How do we weigh those short-term gains against the long-term consequences?
It's about recognizing that our actions have ripple effects. Expanding our circle of compassion to include not just those alive today, but those who will come after us.
It's about what kind of ancestor you want to be, right? Do we want to be the generation that used it all up or the generation that made tough choices to protect the future?
It's a powerful question to ask ourselves. What kind of legacy are we creating? Do we want to leave behind a world ravaged by climate change or a world where future generations can thrive?
It makes you think about the bigger picture of human legacy. It's not just about what stuff we leave behind, but the state of the planet, the well-being of all life.
Right. What impact do we want to have as a species? Do we want to be known as the destroyers or the caretakers?
Those are big questions. Like we need this huge shift in thinking and being.
It's a monumental task, but I think it starts with recognizing our interconnectedness, cultivating empathy, compassion, a sense of responsibility for the well-being of all.
It's about telling new stories, right? Stories that celebrate our connection to nature, that inspire us to protect this planet.
Yes, stories are powerful. They can shape our values, inspire action, create a shared vision of a better future. We need to move beyond the doom and gloom and embrace those narratives of hope and resilience and collective action.
So we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive, haven't we? From the science to the psychology to the economics to the ethics. And it's clear that climate change isn't just a scientific or technological problem. It's a human problem.
It is. It's about how we act, how we relate to the natural world.
It's about recognizing our interconnectedness, taking responsibility, and ultimately choosing to act, not out of fear, but out of love for this planet, for all of us, for all living things.
That's beautifully put, and I think that's what gives me hope. Despite all the challenges we've talked about, there's this incredible potential for human ingenuity, for compassion, for collective action.
I agree. It's not an easy journey, but it's a journey worth taking. And I believe that together we can create a world that's not just habitable, but thriving, for ourselves and for generations to come.
And on that note, I think it's time to wrap up this deep dive.
Yeah, thanks to everyone for joining us on this exploration of how humanity thinks about climate change. It's a complex issue, but we hope this deep dive is giving you some food for thought, some new perspectives, and maybe even a renewed sense of hope. And remember, the conversation doesn't end here. Keep exploring these ideas, keep challenging your assumptions, and keep finding ways to make a difference. The planet needs all of us working together. So let's do